There are kingdoms that once controlled more wealth, more territory, and more power than most nations on Earth today. And yet, if you ask a historian to point to them on a map, some of them still cannot agree on where they stood. One of the kingdoms on this list ruled Egypt itself and built more pyramids than the Egyptians ever did. Another corresponded directly with the Pope as an equal power, sending its own ambassadors to Rome. A third controlled the single most valuable trade route on the entire planet for 600 years, and then vanished so completely that modern scholars did not even know it existed until the year 1918. These were not small, forgotten villages. These were empires with armies, with treasuries, with monuments that still stand taller than most buildings constructed today. And somehow the modern world forgot almost all of them. This is not a list of legends. This is a list of kingdoms with stone walls you can still touch, with royal tombs. Archaeologists have physically excavated with written records preserved in the Vatican archive itself. Every kingdom on this list was real. Every kingdom on this list left evidence behind. And every kingdom on this list challenges the assumption that we already know the shape of human history. Stay with us until the end, because the final kingdom on this list did not. We just get forgotten. It disappeared so completely that its existence had to be reconstructed piece by piece, like a puzzle nobody knew they were solving. And once you understand how an empire that powerful can vanish from memory, you will never look at the history books the same way again. What you are about to see is not a list of ruins. It is a list of proof that entire nations, with kings, armies, and treasuries, can slip completely out of the story the modern world tells about itself. And if that is true for empires this powerful, it raises an uncomfortable question about how much of the past has already been lost without anyone ever noticing. This is our countdown of the 11 forgotten kingdoms even historians can't believe existed. Before we begin, drop the location of the forgotten kingdom you would want to see rebuilt today in the comments below. Because at the end of life, for this list, we want to know which one shocked you the most. Now, let's begin. Number 11. The Kingdom of Kush, Sudan. South of Egypt, along the Nile River, there once stood a kingdom that history books rarely mention. And yet, this kingdom did something no other African civilization ever did. It conquered Egypt and ruled it as its own. For nearly a century, the dominant stage. Kingdom of Kush rose in what is now Sudan, centered first around the city of Napata and later around Meroe, and for over 1,000 years, it stood as one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the ancient world in the year 700. 47 BCE, the Kushite king Pa marched north and conquered Egypt, establishing what historians now call the 25th dynasty, ruling as pharaohs from the Mediterranean coast down to the heart of Africa. But the detail that stuns most people who learn about Kush for the first time has nothing to do with conquest. It is about pyramids. Sudan is home to more pyramids than Egypt. Over 250 of them still stand in the desert, compared to roughly 118. In Egypt, they are smaller and steeper, with sides that rise at nearly 70 degrees. But there are simply more of them. The Kushites developed their own writing system called Meroitic, complete with its own alphabet. And to this day, linguists can read the symbols out loud, but they still cannot fully translate what most of the inscriptions. I mean, the sounds are known. The meaning is not. Researchers at universities in Europe and the United States have spent decades trying to crack the remaining gaps in Meroitic, and the language has still not given up all of its secrets. The kingdom also became a major center of ironworking, earning Meroe the nickname the Birmingham of Africa from 20th century archaeologists because of the massive slag heaps left behind by ancient furnaces. Kush fell into decline around the 4th century CE, eventually overtaken by the rising kingdom of Aksum, but the pyramids remained standing in the desert, largely ignored by the outside world for over 1,000 years. While European explorers wrote extensively about Egypt, almost nothing was written about Kush. What makes this kingdom so unsettling to modern historians is not that it existed, it is that a civilization powerful enough to conquer, Egypt itself, became a footnote, while its rival became the centerpiece of world history. The desert did not erase Kush. The world simply stopped looking. Modern satellite surveys have recently identified dozens of additional Kushite structures buried beneath the sand across northern Sudan, meaning the true scale of this civilization may still be underestimated even today. Archaeologists working in the region describe a constant race against time as looting and modern development threaten sites that have never been properly excavated. Kingdom that once sat on the throne of Egypt itself is still in the process of being rediscovered, piece by piece, nearly 3,000 years after it first rose to power. Number 10. The Land of Punt, location unknown. Every kingdom on this list has a location historians have confirmed, except this one. The Land of Punt appears repeatedly in ancient Egyptian records as a wealthy and almost mythical trading partner, referred to by the Egyptians themselves as Ta-Netcher, the land of the gods. And yet, after thousands of years of research, nobody can say for certain where it actually stood. The most famous account comes from the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, around 1470 BCE, who commissioned a Phot, the major expedition to Punt, and had the entire journey carved into the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. The reliefs show Egyptian ships returning loaded with frankincense myrrh trees, planted in baskets with their roots intact. Gold, ebony, ivory, leopard skins, and even live baboons. The sheer scale of the goods described suggests Punt was not a small trading post. It was a wealthy and organized kingdom, capable of producing and exporting luxury goods on an industrial scale. For centuries, scholars debated its location, placing it anywhere from modern-day Somalia to Eritrea, Sudan, or even the Arabian Peninsula near Yemen. Recent studies using isotopic analysis on mummified baboons brought back from Punt and preserved in Egyptian tombs have narrowed the Elubis's likely region to somewhere around modern Eritrea and eastern Ethiopia. But even this evidence is not conclusive. The actual capital, the royal family, the language spoken there, none of it has ever been found. What makes Punt different from every other kingdom on this list is that we do not just lack details about its people, we lack its physical footprint entirely. There are no ruins confirmed to belong to Punt, no royal tombs, no written records. From the Puntites themselves, everything we know comes exclusively from the outside, from Egyptian scribes describing a place they traveled to but never fully documented for a civilization wealthy enough to trade gold and incense with, pharaohs, for centuries, and be immortalized in stone carvings on royal temple walls. It is a strange kind of erasure. The kingdom that supplied Egypt's most sacred incense for its temples has become one of archaeology's most persistent, unsolved mysteries, a nation the Egyptians called divine and modern historians still cannot place on a map. Some researchers now believe Punt may not have been a single fixed kingdom at all, but a shifting network of trading communities along both sides of the southern Red Sea, which would explain why the evidence refuses to settle in one location. If that theory holds true, then Punt was not simply lost, it may be a kingdom that was never meant to be pinned down. In the first place, a wealthy trading civilization that moved with the routes it controlled rather than staying still long enough for history to catch up to it. Number 9. The Kingdom of Dilmun, Bahrain. On a small island in the Persian Gulf, smaller than the city of Los Angeles, there once stood a kingdom the ancient Sumerians believed was paradise itself. Dilmun appears in some of the oldest written texts on the planet, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, where it is described as a pure and blessed land, where the sun rises, where sickness does not exist, and where the gods themselves once lived. The Sumerians who lived in modern-day Iraq did not consider Dilmun a myth they treated. it has a real trading partner. And for good reason. Archaeologists have confirmed that Dilmun controlled a critical stretch of Bronze Age maritime trade, connecting Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan for over 1,000 years. But the detail that stops most researchers cold is what is buried beneath the island itself. Bahrain contains more than 170,000 ancient burial mounds scattered across the landscape, making it one of the largest prehistoric cemeteries ever discovered on Earth for an island this small. The sheer density of graves is almost impossible to explain. Some mounds are simple, others are elaborate, multi-chambered royal tombs, suggesting a highly stratified society, with kings, priests, and a wealthy merchant-class. Archaeologists working at the site, known as Qalat al-Bahrain, have uncovered layers of continuous settlement, stretching back over 4,000 years, along with the remains of the Barbar Temple, a stepped structure built directly over natural freshwater springs that the Dilmunites appear to have worshipped as sacred. Dilmun grew wealthy by controlling the copper trade from Oman and the tin and precious stone trade coming from the Indus Valley, effectively acting as the customs checkpoint of the ancient world. Any ship moving goods through the Persian Gulf had to pass through Dilmun's waters. Around 1600 BCE, the kingdom's power began to fade as trade routes shifted and larger empires absorbed the region. The freshwater springs that once made the island seem miraculous gradually dried up, and the paradise described in Sumerian mythology quietly became just another patch of desert coastline. What makes Dilmun extraordinary is that an entire ancient civilization believed this real place was the location of eternal life. And today, most people walking through modern Bahrain have no idea they are standing on top of what the world's first writers called heaven on earth. Every time a new building foundation is dug, in the modern capital city of Manama, construction crews still routinely uncover ancient burial chambers, forcing work to stop, while archaeologists document what lies beneath entire neighborhoods of a living paradise, described in the oldest story ever written, continue to surface by accident, underneath a modern nation that spent most of the 20th century unaware of exactly what it was built on top of. Number 8. The Nabatean Kingdom, Petra, Jordan. Hidden inside a narrow canyon in the deserts of southern Jordan, there is a city carved directly into rose-colored sandstone cliffs that remained essentially unknown to the Western world. For centuries, the Nabatean Kingdom built Petra as their capital, sometime around the 4th century BCE, and turned it into one of the wealthiest trading centers in the ancient Middle East. The Nabateans were originally nomadic Arab traders, but they transformed themselves into master engineers, building an extraordinary network of dams, cisterns, and channels that captured and controlled scarce desert water, allowing a massive population to thrive in a landscape that received almost no rainfall. The city's most famous structure, the treasury known locally as Al-Khazneh, stands nearly 140 feet tall, carved directly out of solid rock, and is only reached by walking through the Seek, a narrow, winding canyon passage over half a mile long, with walls rising up to 200 feet on either side. This natural defensive corridor made Petra almost impossible to conquer by force, and allowed the Nabateans to control the incense and spice trade routes stretching from Arabia to the Mediterranean, growing extraordinarily rich in the process. At its peak, the kingdom may have supported a population of over 20,000 people. In the middle of a desert, most civilizations would consider uninhabitable, but Petra's power did not last. After the Romans annexed the kingdom in 106 CE, and trade routes shifted toward the sea, the city slowly declined. A series of earthquakes damaged its water systems, and by the early Middle Ages, Petra was almost completely abandoned, swallowed by sand and silence. For nearly 1,000 years, the outside world had no idea it existed. Local Bedouin tribes knew of the ruins, but kept the location secret from outsiders, until 1812, when a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt disguised himself as a Muslim traveler and convinced a local guide to lead him into the canyon, becoming the first Westerner in centuries to lay eyes on the treasury, the kingdom sophisticated enough to conquer the desert itself, had been sitting in plain sight the whole time, simply waiting for someone to walk through the right canyon. Even now, researchers estimate that as much as 85% of Petra remains completely unexcavated, buried beneath centuries of sand and sediment. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted in recent years, have revealed entire structures still hidden beneath the desert floor, including a massive, monumental platform archaeologists only detected in 2016, meaning the version of Petra tourists walk through today may only be a small fraction of the kingdom the Nabateans actually built. Number 7. The Kingdom of Aksum, Ethiopia. In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, there once stood a kingdom so powerful that a 3rd-century Persian prophet named Mani ranked it among the 4 greatest civilizations on Earth, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. And yet today, most people outside of Ethiopia have never heard its name. The Kingdom of Aksum controlled trade routes, connecting the Roman Empire to India and beyond. Growing wealthy from the export of ivory, gold, and exotic animals, its rulers minted their own gold, silver and bronze coinage centuries before most European kingdoms did, stamping them with Aksumite script, making them among the earliest coins in the world to display an official written language. Aksum's most staggering physical legacy still stands. Today, massive carved stone obelisks, called stelae, rise from the ground, with the tallest surviving example reaching roughly 79 feet into the sky, while a collapsed stele, believed to have originally stood over 100 feet, remains shattered on the ground where it fell over 1,500 years ago. These were not simple standing stones. They were carved to resemble multi-story buildings, complete with false doors and windows built as grave markers for Aksumite royalty, and quarried, transported, and erected using construction techniques that modern engineers still study today. In 330 CE, King Ezana converted the kingdom to Christianity, making Aksum one of the very first nations on earth to adopt Christianity as an official state religion, predating the Roman Empire's conversion by several decades. Aksum developed its own written language, Ge'ez, which remains in liturgical use in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to this very day, making it one of the oldest continuously used alphabets on the planet, but perhaps the most extraordinary. Claim tied to Aksum is a religious one. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in the city of Aksum, claims to house the actual Ark of the Covenant, the biblical container said to hold the stone tablets given to Moses, according to Ethiopian tradition. It has rested there for centuries, guarded continuously by a single monk, chosen for life, who is never permitted to leave the chapel grounds. No outsider has ever been allowed to see it and confirm its existence, whether or not the Ark itself is real. Aksum's coins, its obelisks, and its ancient script are not legend. They are physical proof that one of history's 4 great civilizations quietly slipped out of the modern world's memory in 2005. Italy finally returned a looted Aksumite obelisk that Mussolini's forces had stolen and shipped to Rome. In 1937, the massive stone monument had to be cut into 3 pieces just to transport it back, reassembled in Aksum. After sitting in an Italian public square for nearly 70 years, a quiet reminder that even the physical evidence of this civilization spent much of the last century scattered outside the country that built it. Number 6. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe, Southern Africa. In the hills of modern-day Zimbabwe, there stands a stone city, so massive and so precisely constructed that for over a century, colonial authorities simply refused to believe that African builders were capable of making it the kingdom of Zimbabwe flourished between roughly the 11th and 15th centuries CE, built by ancestors of the Shona people, and it remains the largest ancient stone structure south of the Sahara Desert. The central complex known today as Great Zimbabwe was built entirely without mortar, using a dry stone construction technique, so skilled that some of the granite walls still stand over 36 feet tall and stretch more than 820 feet in length after nearly 600 years without a single collapse. At its height, the kingdom controlled a vast trade network, reaching gold and ivory across the Indian Ocean to Persia, India, and even China. Archaeologists have recovered Chinese porcelain, Persian pottery, and glass beads from as far away as the Middle East. Buried within the ruins, evidence of a wealthy, sophisticated civilization, plugged directly into global trade centuries before European contact. The population at its peak is estimated to have reached as high as 18,000 people, making it one of the largest urban centers in the region's history. But when European colonizers encountered the ruins in the 19th century, they refused to credit local Africans with building it, instead crediting us, the Phoenicians, the Queen of Sheba, or lost white civilizations theories with absolutely no archaeological support behind them. The Rhodesian colonial government, which ruled the region until 1980, actively suppressed archaeological findings that confirmed African origin because it directly contradicted the racist justification for white minority rule. Scholars who published accurate findings were pressured, censored, or ignored for decades. It was not until independence that Zimbabwean archaeologists and historians could fully confirm and publicize what the evidence had shown all along. Shona people built this. The country of Zimbabwe was even named after the ruins upon independence, choosing to honor rather than hide the achievement colonial powers had spent a century trying to erase. What makes this kingdom's story so haunting is not just that it was forgotten, it is that its erasure was not an accident. It was deliberate. Researchers now believe the kingdom's decline may have been driven partly by environmental collapse, as the growing population overworked the surrounding land and exhausted local resources, forcing the ruling elite to abandon the capital entirely by the 16th century, which means the very stones colonial officials once refused to credit to Africans may also hold. An early warning about the environmental limits of large-scale urban growth, long before industrial civilization ever had to consider the same problem. We are now halfway through this countdown, and if you thought a stone city taller than a modern apartment building was the most staggering thing this list had to offer, just wait, because the kingdoms still ahead of us were wealthier, stranger, and even harder to believe. Number 5. The Wagadu Empire, West Africa. Long before European explorers ever charted the coast of West Africa, there was an empire so wealthy that medieval Arab geographers wrote about its king's gold with genuine astonishment. The Wagadu Empire, commonly known to history as the Ghana Empire, though it was not located in the modern nation of Ghana, controlled the trans-Saharan trade routes, moving gold north from West African mines and salt south from Saharan deposits. For nearly 4 centuries, the empire's rulers grew fantastically rich, simply by taxing every ounce of gold and every slab of salt that passed through their territory. An 11th century Andalusian geographer named al-Bakri wrote detailed accounts of the royal court, describing a king so wealthy that his horses were tethered with gold chains, and even his hunting dogs wore collars made of gold and silver. The capital city, Kumbi Saleh, is described in historical Arabic sources as a massive urban center, divided into 2 parts, a royal quarter for the king and his court, and a merchant quarter filled with mosques, traders, and scholars from across the Islamic world. Contemporary accounts describe stone houses, multiple-story buildings, and a level of urban planning that rivaled contemporary cities in Europe. At its height, the empire may have controlled territory, stretching across parts of modern Mauritania, Mali, and Senegal. But around the 11th and 12th centuries, the empire began to decline, weakened by prolonged drought, overextended trade dependency, and increasing military pressure. Eventually, the empire was absorbed into the rising Mali Empire, which would later produce the legendarily wealthy ruler Mansa Musa. But here is the detail that stunned modern archaeologists. For centuries after the empire's collapse, nobody could locate its capital. The exact site of Kumbi Saleh was lost, passed down only through fragments of Arabic manuscripts, until French colonial researchers finally identified ruins in southeastern Mauritania in the early 20th century that matched the old descriptions. Excavations at the site have uncovered stone foundations, pottery, and Arabic inscriptions, confirming a genuinely massive urban settlement once stood there. An empire wealthy enough to be described in awe by scholars across the Islamic world for 400 years had its physical capital reduced to sand, dunes, and rubble that took researchers nearly 1,000 years to correctly identify. Even today, large portions of the Kumbi Saleh site remain unexcavated, and the harsh Saharan environment continues to threaten what little has already been uncovered, leaving historians racing to document a capital city that took a millennium to find before the desert has the chance to bury it all over again. Number 4. The Kingdom of Congo, Central Africa. In 1483, Portuguese explorers, sailing along the coast of Central Africa, encountered something they did not expect: a large, centralized African kingdom with its own government, its own legal system, and a royal court that operated with sophistication equal to anything in Europe. The Kingdom of Congo stretched across parts of what is now Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Republic of Congo, ruled by a king called the Manikongo, from the capital, the city of Mbanza, Congo. In 1491, the reigning king converted to Catholicism, taking the baptismal name João I, and within a generation, the kingdom had become one of the most literate Christian societies anywhere outside of Europe. What makes Congo so extraordinary is not simply that its king converted, it is that Congo engaged with Europe as a political equal, rather than a colonized territory. King Afonso I, who ruled in the early 1500s, could read and write fluently in Portuguese, and personally corresponded directly with the King of Portugal and with the Pope in Rome, sending his own sons to be educated in Europe, and appointing his son Henrique as a Catholic bishop, making him one of the first Black African Catholic bishops in recorded history. Dozens of original letters written by Congo's kings still survive today, preserved in the Vatican's secret archives and in Portuguese royal archives. Handwritten diplomatic correspondence between an African king and European heads of state, treated as legitimate sovereign to sovereign communication. But the very trade relationship that connected Congo to Europe eventually became the force that destroyed it. As the transatlantic slave trade expanded, Portuguese merchants began pressuring the kingdom for captives, creating internal conflict, corruption, and civil war that Afonso himself protested directly to the Portuguese crown in written letters, begging them to stop the trade that was tearing his kingdom apart. The pleas went largely unanswered. Over the following 2 centuries, the kingdom fractured, collapsed, and was absorbed into colonial territories, its history erased from most European history books entirely, despite leaving behind one of the largest archives of African royal correspondence in existence. What makes Congo impossible to ignore is the proof that survives: an African king, writing directly to a pope in his own hand, as an equal. And yet almost nobody today has ever heard his name. The ruins of Mbanza, Congo were finally recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2017, and nearly 530 years after the kingdom first entered the historical record, a formal acknowledgement that arrived only after centuries of the world treating this literate diplomatic Christian kingdom as a footnote rather than the sovereign power. Its own surviving letters prove that it was. Number 3. The Chachapoya Kingdom, Peru. High in the cloud forests of northern Peru, at elevations where mist permanently blankets the mountainsides, there once lived a civilization The Inca themselves feared enough to give them a lasting nickname. The Chachapoya became known as the warriors of the clouds, building their kingdom in one of the most difficult-to-access terrains in all of South America centuries before the Inca ever arrived. Their greatest surviving achievement is the fortress city of Cuilap, a massive stone complex perched on a mountain ridge over 10,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by defensive walls that in places rise higher than the outer walls of Machu Picchu itself. Inside those walls, archaeologists have identified the remains of more than 400 circular stone structures decorated with geometric friezes. Unlike anything else found in the Andes, the Chachapoya built round houses rather than the rectangular structures common to most Andean cultures, and they placed elaborate carved zigzag and diamond patterns along the exterior walls, suggesting a distinct artistic and cultural identity separate from their more famous neighbors. Perhaps the most haunting evidence of their civilization comes from the cliffs themselves. Chachapoya burial sites, known as sarcophagi and mummy bundles, have been discovered, tucked into inaccessible rock faces hundreds of feet above the Fours Valley floor. Some sites contain dozens of mummified remains, wrapped and sealed centuries ago, preserved by the cool, dry mountain air. The Inca Empire eventually conquered the Chachapoya in the late 15th century, after a long and costly military campaign, incorporating their warriors into the Inca army, where they gained a reputation as fierce and loyal fighters. But the double-do's conquest came at a devastating cost when Spanish colonizers arrived shortly afterward. European diseases swept through the already weakened population, killing the vast majority of Chachapoya survivors within just a few decades. Because their homeland was so remote, hidden deep within cloud forest terrain, that even modern researchers struggle to access. Many Chachapoya sites remained essentially unexplored and undocumented well into the 20th century. Archaeologists are still actively excavating and cataloging Chachapoya ruins today, meaning an entire civilization capable of building fortress walls taller than Machu Picchu's remains, only partially understood, not because the evidence does not exist, but because the mountains have made it nearly impossible to reach. Local guides continue to report newly spotted sarcophagi tucked into cliff faces that have never been formally documented or studied, which means somewhere in those cloud forests, there are almost certainly Chachapoya burial sites that no archaeologist has ever laid eyes on, waiting in the mist for someone willing to make the climb. Number 2. The Kingdom of Mustang, Nepal. Sealed behind the Himalayas, in a high-altitude desert valley bordering Tibet, there is a kingdom that survived as an independent monarchy until the year 2008, and yet almost nobody outside of Nepal has ever heard of it. The Kingdom of Lo, commonly known as Mustang, was founded in the 14th century by a Tibetan warrior named Ame Pal, who built his capital at Lo Manthang, a walled city, surrounded by mud brick fortifications that still stand today for centuries. Mustang existed as a semi-independent Buddhist kingdom, paying tribute first to Tibet and later to Nepal, while maintaining its own royal line, its own language, and its own deeply preserved form of Tibetan Buddhist culture. What makes Mustang extraordinary is what happened after China's occupation of Tibet in the mid-20th century. As monasteries were destroyed and religious practices suppressed across Tibet itself, the isolated Kingdom of Mustang inadvertently became one of the last places on Earth where authentic pre-occupation Tibetan Buddhist culture continued completely undisturbed. Ancient monasteries, manuscripts, and religious paintings that were destroyed elsewhere across the Bides. Tibetan Plateau survived here simply because the outside world could not reach it. The Nepalese government kept Mustang almost entirely closed to foreigners until 1992, requiring special restricted permits, even today, limiting the number of outside visitors allowed into the region every single year. Recent archaeological expeditions have uncovered something even the local population had mostly forgotten. Hundreds of hand-carved caves, cut directly into vertical cliff faces, some soaring over 150 feet above the valley floor. Accessible only by climbing sheer rock walls with no visible pathway leading up to them. Inside, researchers have discovered ancient manuscripts, remarkably preserved wall paintings, and mummified human remains dating back well over 1,000 years. Nobody has fully explained why these sky caves were built at such extreme and dangerous heights, though theories range from protection against invaders to sacred burial practices. The kingdom's royal line finally ended in 2008, when Nepal formally abolished its monarchy, but the walled city of Lomanthang, its cliffside caves, and its centuries of undisturbed Buddhist heritage remain standing. Today, a living kingdom hidden in plain sight for over 100 years, simply because the mountains refused to let the modern world in. Even now, researchers estimate that thousands of ancient manuscripts remain uncatalogued inside these cliffside caves, many of them slowly deteriorating from exposure to wind and sunlight faster than conservationists can climb up to preserve them. Which means a piece of Tibetan Buddhist history, destroyed almost everywhere else on Earth, is still quietly disappearing. Here too, just far more slowly, and far more privately. Number 1. The Srivijaya Empire, Indonesia. Every kingdom on this list was forgotten to some degree, but the final entry did something none of the others managed. It disappeared so completely from human memory that for centuries, historians did not just forget where it was. They did not, it had ever existed at all. The Srivijaya Empire rose on the island of Sumatra sometime in the 7th century CE, and for roughly 600 years, it controlled the single most valuable trade corridor on the entire planet. The Strait of Malacca, the narrow waterway connecting the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, through which the majority of trade between China, India, and the Middle East was forced to pass. Srivijaya did not need to conquer distant lands to become one of the wealthiest empires in human history. It simply controlled the water. Chinese Buddhist monks traveling to India for religious study routinely stopped in Srivijaya's capital, first describing a sophisticated urban center filled with thousands of monks, a major center for Buddhist scholarship and translation, work rivaling universities anywhere else in Asia. At the time, Arab traders wrote about the empire's wealth and organization. Chinese court records document official tribute missions and diplomatic exchanges, spanning centuries. This was not a minor regional power. It was one of the most important economic and religious centers anywhere on the planet, controlling maritime trade routes that connected half the known world. And yet, by the time European planets, colonial powers arrived in Southeast Asia, centuries later, the empire had vanished so thoroughly that not a single local kingdom even remembered its name. For hundreds of years afterward, there was simply no Srivijaya in the historical record at all. No European scholar, no local historian, no colonial administrator connected the fragmented ruins scattered across Sumatra to any unified empire. It was not until 1918 that a French scholar named Georges Coedès finally pieced together the truth by cross-referencing scattered Chinese court records. Ancient stone inscriptions written in Old Malay, found across Sumatra and Arab. The merchant accounts, realizing they all described the exact same lost empire, an empire that had once controlled the most valuable trade route on Earth for 6 centuries, reconstructed entirely from fragments, because every direct memory of it had simply died out. And this is exactly why Srivijaya belongs at number 1. It does not just prove that kingdoms get forgotten. It proves that an empire can become so completely erased from human memory that its own existence has to be rebuilt from scratch, like evidence at a crime scene nobody even knew had occurred. If an empire that powerful, controlling the most important trade route on the entire planet, can vanish that completely. What does that say about everything else we assume we already know about human history? Archaeologists are still actively searching for the exact location of Srivijaya's capital city today, with competing sites near modern Palembang in southern Sumatra, yielding gold, artifacts, wooden pilings, and inscribed stones. But no single confirmed royal palace or central complex has ever been definitively excavated, which means the empire that once controlled the most valuable trade route on the planet still has not fully given up the location of its own throne. That brings us to the end of our countdown, from a kingdom powerful enough to conquer Egypt itself, to an empire so completely forgotten that historians had to reconstruct its existence from fragments piece by piece. 11 kingdoms once stood as wealthy centers of trade, religion, and power, and 11 kingdoms were almost entirely erased from the story the modern world tells about itself. History is not simply what happened. History is what survived to be written down. And what these 11 kingdoms prove, beyond any doubt, is that survival and greatness are not the same thing. An empire can rule for 600 years and still disappear. A kingdom can correspond directly with a pope and still be forgotten. A civilization can build stone walls taller than Machu Picchu and still remain unexplored centuries later. The past is far larger and far stranger than the version most of us were taught in school. And if 11 kingdoms this significant could slip through the cracks of memory, it is worth asking, how many more are still out there right now, waiting in the sand, under the jungle canopy, or beneath a modern city, for someone to finally notice they were ever there at all? So which of these 11 forgotten kingdoms shocked you the most? Was it Kush ruling Egypt from the south? Was it Congo writing directly to the Vatican? Or was it Srivijaya vanishing so completely it had to be rebuilt from fragments? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if this journey through history's forgotten kingdoms expanded the way you see the past, then you clearly have great taste. Hit subscribe and join us for the next countdown, because the world has buried far more history than any single video can uncover. We will see you next time.